Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sovereign Thinking. My name is Michael, and today we will be reading part 3 of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series by Robert Kiyosaki. As we press forward in the book series, Robert confronts Mike's dad, who seemingly purposefully decided to anger the young boy at the time. The reason that this part of the book is so critical to understanding money is that the lessons that Mike's dad teaches Rob at this time goes much deeper than just learning how to become rich. He teaches the kids how life gives them lessons. Before we begin, please note that this video is not offering financial advice. Rather, we are reading Robert Kiyosaki's work for entertainment purposes only, where I provide commentary with my own personal thoughts, reviewing what we have read. So with all that said, let's get started. I was ready to face Mike's dad. Even my real dad was angry with him. My real dad, the one I call the poor one, thought that my rich dad was violating child labor laws and should be investigated. My educated poor dad told me to demand what I deserve, at least 25 cents an hour. My poor dad told me that if I did not get a raise, I was to quit immediately. "You don't need that damn job anyways," said my poor dad with indignation. At 8 o'clock Saturday morning, I walked through the door of Mike's house when Mike's dad opened it. "Take a seat and wait in line," he said as I entered. He turned and disappeared into his little office next to the bedroom. I looked around the room and didn't see Mike anywhere. Feeling awkward, I cautiously sat down next to the same two women who were there 4 weeks earlier. They smiled and slid down the couch to make room for me. 45 minutes went by, and I was steaming. The two women had met with him and left 30 minutes earlier. An older gentleman was in there for 20 minutes and was also gone. Finally, 15 minutes later, at exactly 9 o'clock, Rich Dad walked out of his office, said nothing, and signaled with his hand for me to enter. "I understand you want a raise or you're going to quit," Rich Dad said as he swiveled in his office chair. "Well, you're not keeping your end of the bargain," I blurted out, nearly in tears. It was really frightening for me to confront a grown-up. "You said that you would teach me if I worked for you. Well, I've worked for you. I've worked hard. I've given up my baseball games to work for you, but you haven't kept your word, and you haven't taught me anything. You are a crook like everyone in town thinks you are. You're greedy, you want all the money and don't care for any of your employees. You made me wait and don't show me any respect. I'm only a little boy, but I deserve to be treated better." Rich Dad rocked back in his swivel chair, hands up to his chin, and stared at me. "Not bad," he said. "In less than a month, you sound like most of my employees." "What?" I asked. Not understanding what he was saying, I continued with my grievance. "I thought you were going to keep your end of the bargain and teach me. Instead, you want to torture me? That's cruel. That's really cruel." "I am teaching you," Rich Dad said quietly. "What have you taught me?" "Nothing," I said angrily. "You haven't even talked to me once since I agreed to work for peanuts. 10 cents an hour? Ha, I should notify the government about you. You have child labor laws, you know. My dad works for the government, you know." "Wow," said Rich Dad. "Now you sound like most of the people who used to work for me. People I've either fired or who have quit." "So what do you have to say?" I demanded, feeling pretty brave for a little kid. "You lied to me. I've worked for you, and you have not kept your word. You haven't taught me anything." "How do you know that I have not taught you anything?" asked Rich Dad calmly. "Well, you've never talked to me. I've worked for 3 weeks, and you've not taught me anything," I said with a pout. "Does teaching mean talking or a lecture?" Rich Dad asked. "Well, yes," I replied. "That's how they teach you in school," he said, smiling. "But that is not how life teaches you. And I would say that life is the best teacher of all. Most of the time, life does not talk to you. It just sort of pushes you around. Each push is life saying, 'Wake up, there's something I want you to learn.'" What is this man talking about? I asked myself. Life pushing me around was life talking to me? Now I knew I had to quit my job. I was talking to someone who needed to be locked up. If you learn life's lessons, you will do well. If not, life will just continue to push you around. People do two things. Some just let life push them around. Others get angry and push back. But they push back against their boss or their job or their husband or their wife. They do not know it's life that's pushing. I had no idea what he was talking about. Life pushes all of us around. Some people give up and others fight. A few learn the lesson and move on. They welcome life pushing them around. To these few people, it means they need and want to learn something. They learn and move on. Most quit, and a few, like you, fight. Most life lessons aren't taught in a classroom. Just to reiterate what Mike's dad is saying, the very first lesson that he teaches the kids is that there is more than one way to learn. One is through a classroom-like setting, and the other way is to learn through experience. The reason why I wanted to pretty much repeat what we had just read is that the important thing to note is that Mike's dad is helping to expand these kids' imaginations. Remember when Robert Kiyosaki mentioned how one dad gave up working his mind and the other looked to expand his mind? Well, this is the first instant of this very lesson. Also, another lesson here is that Mike's dad explains the freedom of choice that every person has when life throws a curveball at you, and how some people choose to transmute and use curveballs to their advantage. But for now, let's continue reading. Rich Dad stood and shut the creaky old wooden window that needed repair. If you learn this lesson, you will grow into a wise, wealthy, and happy young man. If you don't, you will spend your life blaming a job, low pay, or your boss for your problems. You'll live life always hoping for that big break that will solve all of your money problems. Rich Dad looked over at me to see if I was still listening. His eyes met mine. We stared at each other, communicating through our eyes. Finally, I looked away once I had absorbed his message. I knew he was right. I was blaming him, and I did ask to learn. I was fighting. Rich Dad continued, or if you're the kind of person who has no guts, you just give up every time life pushes you. If you're that kind of person, you'll live all your life playing it safe, doing the right things, saving yourself for some event that never happens. Then you die a boring old man. You'll have lots of friends who really like you because you were such a nice, hard-working guy. But the truth is that you let life push you into submission. Deep down, you were terrified of taking risks. You really wanted to win. The fear of losing was greater than the excitement of winning. Deep inside, you and only you will know you didn't go for it. You chose to play it safe. Our eyes met again. You've been pushing me around, I asked. Some people might say that, smiled Rich Dad. I would say that I just gave you a taste of life. What taste of life? I asked, still angry but now curious and ready to learn. You boys are the first people who have ever asked me to teach them how to make money. I have more than 150 employees, and not one of them has asked me what I know about money. They ask me for a job and a paycheck, but never to teach them about money. So most will spend the best years of their lives working for money, not really understanding what it is that they are working for. I sat there, listening intently. So when Mike told me you wanted to learn how to make money, I decided to design a course that mirrored real life. I could talk until I was blue in the face, but you wouldn't hear a thing. So I decided to let life push you around a bit so you could hear me. That's why I only paid you 10 cents. So what is the lesson I learned from working for only 10 cents an hour, I asked? That you're cheap and exploit your workers? Rich Dad rocked back and laughed heartily. Finally, he said, you'd best change your point of view. Stop blaming me and thinking I'm the problem. If you think I'm the problem, then you have to change me. If you realize that you're the problem, then you can change yourself, learn something, and grow wiser. Most people want everyone else in the world to change but themselves. Let me tell you, it's easier to change yourself than everyone else. This passage reads like an unintentional veiled criticism of the modern age. To be honest, this whole book reads like a veiled criticism on today's society, which I feel is long overdue. I digress. I keep saying this, but it bears repeating. Awareness is half the battle, and once you are aware, you have the power to change. I also think that it's important that when we do get triggered, and yes, eventually we all get triggered over something, that we view triggers as lessons and as awarenesses to grow personally. When a trigger occurs, are you expecting the world to change, or are you expecting yourself to change? You see, there can be some real gold in there when you take the responsibility and the opportunity to really analyze your own triggers. I will certainly cover questions and prompts like that in the journal exercise coming up this Friday. But let's continue. Well, if you don't pay me more or show me more respect and teach me, I'll quit. Well put, Rich Dad said, and that's exactly what most people do. They quit and go looking for another job, a better opportunity, and higher pay, actually thinking that this will solve the problem. In most cases, it won't. So what should I do, I asked. Just take this measly 10 cents an hour and smile? Rich Dad smiled. That's what the other people do. But that's all they do, waiting for a raise, thinking that more money will solve their problems. Most just accept it and take a second job, working even harder, but again, accepting a small paycheck. I sat staring at the floor, beginning to understand the lesson Rich Dad was presenting. I could sense it was a taste of life. Finally, I looked up and asked, "So what will solve this problem?" "This," he said, leaning forward in his chair and tapping me gently on the head, "the stuff between your ears." It was at that moment that Rich Dad shared the pivotal point of view that separated him from his employees and my poor dad, and led him to eventually become one of the richest men in Hawaii. While my highly educated but poor dad struggled financially all his life, it was a singular point of view that made all the difference over a lifetime. Rich Dad explained this point of view over and over, which I call lesson number 1. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. So is your money working for you? Just some food for thought there. But in all seriousness, Mike's dad hasn't mentioned anything about how to make money yet. In fact, he's suggesting here at this point, according to my interpretation, that the bigger lesson here is to learn how to take back your own personal power and to think for yourself and to have a distinct point of view when it comes to making money. My interpretation here is that I think that Mike's dad is suggesting that the money will follow when you are aware of what society is all about and when you break free from the limitations of the systems put in place in modern day society. But that is just a personal opinion and interpretation. I will be ending the reading here today. The next section actually shows how Robert and Mike were able to apply these lessons that Mike's dad had taught. And yes, we finally begin to really start reading about making money and becoming rich and all that glorious stuff that we were eager to learn from the book in the beginning. It's just that we had to get through some of the theory and philosophical parts of the book first, and there are still more that are upcoming, so we'll still have to work through them. Anyways, you'll see how these philosophies and lessons apply throughout the rest of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I have also listed the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book in the description box below if you wanted to pick a copy up for yourself. As always, please just take what vibes with you, leave what doesn't, and just take it one day at a time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.